The 12-hour confession, Eleanor Vance, at 72, felt the familiar rumble beneath her as the California zephyr sliced through the vast American landscape. The rhythmic clickety-clack of the train wheels against the rails was a comforting, hypnotic sound, a constant companion on her journey from Boston to San Francisco. She was heading to visit her grandchildren, a dutiful pilgrimage, a gesture of familial connection that now formed the bedrock of her quiet, widowed existence. But in truth, she sought a different kind of peace, a quiet solace that only the boundless expanse of the American West, stretching out beyond the panoramic windows of the observation car, seemed to offer. It was a place where memories could diffuse into the vastness, or perhaps coalesce into clarity. Her life as a retired art historian, once vibrant and meticulously ordered, now felt like a beautifully bound but slightly dusty old book. The chapters were well defined. Wellesley College, then graduate school at Harvard, followed by decades of teaching, research, and publications. She had loved her husband Arthur deeply. Their life together had been stable, intellectually stimulating, filled with shared passions for museums, rare books, and quiet evenings debating philosophical texts. They had built a beautiful home, raised 2 children, and cultivated a respectable, fulfilling existence. Yet, even after all these years, a faint, almost imperceptible ache persisted in her heart, a silent testament to a path not taken, a choice unmade, a fleeting moment that had promised a wild, untamed freedom she had ultimately rejected. It was a ghost she rarely acknowledged, but one that sometimes stirred in the quiet hours of the night. Today, however, the ghost was not content to merely stir. It materialized, or so it seemed, in the form of a fellow passenger. Eleanor sat in the observation car, sipping lukewarm tea, her gaze drifting over the breathtaking tableau of crimson canyons and snow-capped peaks. Suddenly, her eyes snagged on a figure across the car, a man, perhaps in his mid-70s, his silver hair swept back from a strong, tanned face. He was sketching intently in a small notebook, his hands surprisingly nimble, tracing lines with a confident grace. The way his brow furrowed in concentration, the effortless flow of his charcoal on paper, the subtle tilt of his head as he assessed his work. A sudden, dizzying jolt went through Eleanor, so potent it made her spill a drop of tea on her linen napkin. He looked strikingly, hauntingly familiar. Not quite him, but enough to trigger a cascade of vivid, almost visceral memories, pulling her back 5 decades to another train, another journey, and a 12-hour confession that had irrevocably altered the course of her life, leaving behind a persistent phantom limb of regret. It was the sweltering summer of 1972. Eleanor Vance, then a fresh-faced 22-year-old, felt a suffocating weight of expectation pressing down on her. She had just graduated Wellesley College with honors, a promising future laid out before her in academia, a path meticulously planned by her well-meaning but overbearing parents. They envisioned Harvard, then a prestigious professorship, a life of intellectual pursuit, respectable and secure. She'd even received an unexpected, modest inheritance from a distant aunt, a sum that should have felt liberating, but only added to her existential angst. It was enough money to finally make a choice, to step outside the prescribed lines, but she felt paralyzed by the very freedom it offered. She was supposed to know what to do next, but all she felt was a profound, aching emptiness, a desperate longing for something she couldn't name. She booked a cross-country train ticket on the legendary California Zephyr, a desperate escape from the suffocating pressure of choice, from the well-intentioned advice of her parents, from the stifling expectations of her suburban Boston existence. Her parents believed she was merely embarking on a pre-graduate school adventure, a brief respite before starting her rigorous studies in art history at Harvard. In truth, she was fleeing, hoping that the vastness of the country, the anonymity of the journey, would somehow provide answers to the churning questions within her, or at least a temporary reprieve from them. Her private compartment on the train was small, efficient, a tiny cocoon of solitude. As she was unpacking her worn leather suitcase, the door slid open. A young man, perhaps 25, stood there, a lopsided, almost mischievous grin on his face. He wore a rumpled linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned forearms. His dark, unruly hair looked as though it had been perpetually wind-swept. "Looks like we're roommates for the next leg," he said, his voice surprisingly deep, with a faint, unplaceable accent that suggested faraway lands. "Julian Thorne. And you must be Eleanor?" Ellie, usually reserved to the point of appearing aloof, felt a flicker of something she hadn't anticipated: intrigue. Julian Thorne was a striking figure. His dark, unruly hair framed an expressive face, his eyes a startling shade of green that seemed to absorb all the light, drawing you into their depths. He carried a worn leather satchel, bursting at the seams with sketchbooks, paintbrushes, and rolls of canvas. He was a painter, he explained, returning from a solo exhibition in Chicago, heading for the bohemian art scene of San Francisco. He spoke of art, of wanderlust, of living freely, his words painting vivid landscapes that were a stark contrast to Ellie's rigidly structured academic world. He seemed to embody the very freedom she yearned for. The first few hours passed in polite, almost wary conversation. They discussed the ever-changing scenery outside their window, the flat, fertile farmlands of Illinois gradually giving way to the gentle undulations of Iowa. Julian was an effortless conversationalist, effortlessly weaving anecdotes from his travels. Ellie, usually guarded, found herself relaxing in his presence, her initial wariness dissolving into a comfortable curiosity. But as the train plunged deeper into the heartland, the vast plains stretching to an endless horizon, a strange, almost ethereal intimacy began to form between them. Julian, with his disarming honesty and surprisingly probing questions, chipped away at Ellie's carefully constructed walls, revealing the vulnerable young woman beneath. "So Eleanor Vance, future scholar," he'd begun, his gaze surprisingly astute, lingering on her. "What drives you? What makes your heart truly sing, beyond the musty halls of academia?" Ellie hesitated. She spoke, haltingly at first, of her parents' unwavering expectations, of her own deep-seated desire for their approval, of her love for art history, a field where she felt safe, respected, intellectually challenged, but also constrained. "I love learning about art," she admitted, her voice soft, almost a whisper, as if confessing a shameful secret. "But I feel like I'm always looking at it through a pane of glass, like I'm an observer, never a creator. I analyze, I categorize, I contextualize, but I never truly make anything. Julian leaned forward, his green eyes intense, unwavering. And why not? Eleanor, why not step through the glass? What are you truly afraid of? His bluntness was startling yet liberating. She found herself confessing her deepest fears, fears she hadn't even fully admitted to herself. The overwhelming fear of failure, the fear of disappointing her family, the terrifying uncertainty of the unknown, of a life without the pre-approved path. She spoke of her childhood dream of being a painter, a dream swiftly dismissed by her practical, academically minded parents, who steered her towards more sensible, secure pursuits. She admitted to a hidden collection of her own sketches, abstract forms, vivid colors, stored away in a forgotten box in her attic, too afraid to show them to anyone, even herself, for fear of exposing her vulnerability. It was a raw, unfiltered outpouring of her soul, something she had never dared to do with anyone before. Julian, in turn, shared his own story, equally raw and vulnerable. He was an orphan, raised by a kindly but emotionally distant aunt after his parents died in a tragic accident when he was very young. Art, he explained, had been his solace, his refuge, his way of understanding a chaotic, unpredictable world that had stolen everything from him. He spoke of his early struggles, living hand to mouth in various European cities, selling street portraits just to eat, but always pursuing his passion, driven by an inner fire. He recounted tales of painting vibrant murals in smoky Parisian jazz clubs, sketching portraits on dusty street corners in Florence, finding inspiration in every fleeting face, every breathtaking landscape. He talked about the intoxicating freedom of the open road, the exhilaration of waking up in a new place, guided only by the changing light and his own intuition. He lived a life that felt to Ellie like a myth, a beautiful, impossible dream, as the hours melted away, marked only by the changing landscapes outside their compartment window, the golden fields of Iowa giving way to the vast, flat expanse of Nebraska, the distant, hazy promise of the Rocky Mountains looming on the horizon. Their conversation deepened further. They spoke of love, of loss, of the meaning of life, of finding one's purpose. Julian spoke of a true north, an inner compass that guides one to their authentic self, even if the path is unconventional, even if it defies all logic and societal norms. Ellie found herself laughing more easily than she had in years, confiding secrets she hadn't shared with her closest college friends. She felt a lightness, a sense of belonging, a profound connection she hadn't experienced in her entire life. Julian saw her, truly saw her, not as the accomplished academic her parents envisioned, but as the yearning artist hidden beneath layers of conformity, the brave, sensitive woman aching to break free. It was as if their souls had been searching for each other, and the train, a fleeting moment in time, had brought them together. Around mile 800, as the train began its slow, arduous climb into the foothills of the Rockies, and the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, Julian turned to her, his green eyes luminous in the fading light. "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft but firm, laden with a powerful conviction, "you have a choice. This inheritance you spoke of, it's not just money, it's freedom. It's a key. Come with me. Forget graduate school. Forget the expectations. Let's go to Europe. We'll study art, really study it, not just history. We'll paint, we'll travel, we'll discover ourselves, we'll find our true north together. What do you say? His offer hung in the air, audacious, terrifying, exhilarating. It was everything she secretly longed for, and everything she was utterly terrified of. It was a life unwritten, a boundless canvas compared to the neatly printed pages of her academic future. It was a leap into the void. A brief stop for passenger transfers. Julian reached into his satchel and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden pendant on a thin leather cord. It was a compass, its needle pointing north, beautifully rendered, slightly worn from countless journeys. "This," he said, pressing it into her trembling hand, his fingers warm against hers, "is for you, my true north, your true north. Think about it. Make your decision by the next major stop in Denver. If you're coming, I'll be waiting on the platform." He squeezed her hand, a silent plea, a profound act of faith. Then, with a quick, decisive movement, he gathered his satchel, his sketchbooks, and his paint-stained linen jacket. "See you in Denver, Eleanor." He was gone, disappeared onto the platform, blending into the small crowd of departing passengers, a phantom of the choices she faced. Ellie remained in the compartment, clutching the compass pendant, its smooth wood warm against her palm, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The train pulled out of Boulder, slowly at first, then gaining speed, leaving Julian behind, a distant, receding figure on the platform. The landscape outside blurred into streaks of green and brown. Denver was only a few hours away, hours to decide her fate, hours to choose between the secure, predictable path and the wild, exhilarating unknown. Fear, cold and insidious, began to seep into her, chilling her to the bone. The immense weight of her parents' disappointment, the unspoken judgment of society, the terrifying uncertainty of a life without a safety net, without a clear, predefined trajectory. She had always been the diligent one, the obedient one, the one who followed the rules, who achieved the expectations. Could she truly abandon all that, all she was supposed to be, for a whimsical dream? For a connection forged in mere hours with a virtual stranger? The thought was intoxicating, but also utterly paralyzing. Her rational mind, honed by years of academic discipline, screamed against the impulsive leap. The train pulled into Denver. Ellie sat frozen in her seat. Clutching the compass pendant so tightly, her knuckles were white. She watched the bustling platform through the window, a kaleidoscope of faces and luggage. She saw him, Julian. He stood there, by the tracks, a slight figure among the throngs of passengers, his eyes scanning the windows of the departing train, searching for her. He held up a hand, a silent plea, a hopeful farewell. Her hand tightened on the compass pendant, digging into her palm. A physical manifestation of her internal struggle. She wanted to go. Every fiber of her being screamed to step off that train, to run into his arms, to choose freedom, to live the vibrant, unburdened life he offered. But the fear, the deeply ingrained fear of straying from the prescribed path, was too strong, too deeply rooted in her upbringing, in her very identity. The whistle blew, long and mournful. The train lurched forward, slowly at first, then gaining speed. a powerful beast carrying her away from a momentous decision. Julian's face, etched with a mixture of hope and dawning disappointment, grew smaller, then vanished into the receding landscape. She never got off the train. She never said yes. She never saw him again. She never truly forgot the look on his face or the burning shame of her own cowardice, the painful sting of a lost opportunity. She went to graduate school, became a respected art historian, married Arthur, had children, built a beautiful, respectable life. A good life, but safe. Always safe. Now, 50 years later, the older Eleanor watched the silver-haired man in the observation car, a fleeting shadow of a long-lost dream. He wasn't Julian, she had concluded. A faint pang of disappointment mixed with a strange sense of relief. Just a cruel trick of memory, a fleeting resemblance. But the intensity of the memory, the vividness of that old pain, had propelled her out of her seat. She walked through the rocking cars, past the cheerful chatter of the dining car, towards the quiet solitude of the observation car. She needed the open space, the vastness of the Rockies unfolding outside the windows, to clear her head, to put the lingering ghost back in its box. She pushed open the heavy glass door to the observation car. The man was still there, now standing at the railing, looking out at the dramatic panorama of towering peaks and sweeping valleys. He turned, and in that instant, her breath caught, held captive in her chest. His eyes, those startling green eyes, they were the same, older, certainly, framed by wrinkles and crow's feet that spoke of a lifetime of laughter and sorrows, but unmistakably his. And around his neck, on a thin, well-worn leather cord peeking out from beneath his collar, was a familiar wooden pendant. The compass. "Julian," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely a breath. A question and a plea intertwined. The word, unspoken for half a century, felt foreign, yet profoundly right on her tongue. He froze, his head tilted, as if listening to a sound only he could hear, a distant echo from the past. Slowly, as if in a dream, he turned fully, his eyes widening in disbelief, then softening with recognition, a spark of the old mischief flickering within them. "Eleanor?" His voice, a little raspy with age, a little deeper than she remembered, but still carrying that familiar melodic cadence, the faintest hint of an accent. Eleanor Vance. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the breathtaking view outside. 50 years of silence, of wondering, of quiet regret, of a phantom love. You still have it," she said, her voice thick with emotion, pointing a trembling finger towards the wooden pendant. He touched it, his fingers tracing the worn carving, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Always, my true north. I've taken this route many times, Eleanor, just on the off chance. A fool's hope, perhaps, a romantic's delusion, but hope nonetheless." His gaze searched hers, a lifetime of unspoken questions in his eyes. "You never got off the train in Denver." It wasn't a question, but a statement of enduring knowledge, a shared, silent history. "No," she admitted, the shame of that day still coloring her cheeks even after all these years. "I couldn't. I was afraid of everything, of disappointing everyone, of myself." They sat side by side in the quiet intimacy of the observation car. As the train wound its way through the majestic Rockies, they spoke for hours, catching up on 5 decades of lived lives, of parallel existences that had run so close, yet so far apart. Their conversation picked up exactly where it had left off, as if no time had passed, as if the intervening years were merely a brief pause in a never-ending dialogue. Ellie told him about her respectable life, her fulfilling academic career as an art historian, her loving husband, Arthur, and her children and grandchildren, whom she adored. She spoke of the quiet satisfaction of teaching, of sharing her love for art, but also of the persistent, nagging feeling that she hadn't quite lived her own truth, that a part of her had remained caged. She pulled out a small, leather-bound sketchbook from her worn travel bag, its pages filled with intricate sketches, abstract forms, vibrant color studies, her hidden art, sketches she'd never dared to share with anyone, certainly not Arthur. "I never stopped drawing," she confessed, her voice filled with a lifetime of suppressed longing. "Never became a real artist like you." She also showed him a faded, secretly kept photograph of him, taken in that train compartment, tucked deep inside her old travel journal, a silent tribute to a life unlived. Julian, in turn, shared his story. He had become a renowned artist, his galleries celebrated across the globe, from Paris to New York. He had lived the adventurous life they discussed that day, chasing light and inspiration from the bustling souks of Marrakesh to the serene temples of Kyoto, always nomadic, always seeking. He had found fame, critical success, and endless experiences, but he had never married. "I always looked for you, Eleanor," he admitted, his green eyes still holding a hint of that youthful intensity, that profound yearning. "In every city, every face, every crowd, I kept coming back to this train route, always hoping my true north always pointed back to you." They realized, with a profound aching clarity, that their paths had been irrevocably intertwined that day on the train. Even though they had walked them separately for half a century, the compass pendant, her unchosen freedom, his undying hope, it had been more than just a symbol. It had been an invisible thread stretching across time and continents, binding them, a silent witness to their parallel journeys. As the sun began to set, casting long purple shadows over the snow-capped peaks, painting the sky in hues of deep violet and fiery orange, Julian turned to her, his voice gentle, filled with a quiet strength that belied his age. "Eleanor," he said, his hand reaching for hers, his touch as warm and familiar as if no time had passed. "We can't get those 50 years back. That train has long since passed. But we have now the remaining years. What do you say? Shall we finally find our true north together?" Eleanor looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in years, the ache in her heart began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning hope, a sense of rightness. It was a second chance, unexpected and profoundly beautiful. She thought of her children, her grandchildren, the stable, loving life she had known with Arthur, a life she cherished. But she also thought of the young woman who had been too afraid to step off the train, too timid to grasp the wild, exhilarating promise of freedom. "Yes, Julian," she said, her voice clear and strong. A decision made at last, not by fear, but by love and a lifetime of understanding. "Yes, The train continued its journey, carrying them towards a new horizon, not just geographical, but emotional. They talked late into the night, sharing laughter and tears, regrets and dreams, painting a mosaic of their interwoven lives. Eleanor finally found peace, understanding that it was never too late to follow the call of her heart, to embrace the path she had once abandoned, even if it was only for the remaining years. They found their true north together, not on a continent-spanning adventure, but in the quiet solace of shared wisdom, in the profound connection of two souls finally completely understood. Their life, which had been profoundly shaped by a single 12-hour confession and a choice unmade, was now at last ready for its true ending, written together, one cherished moment at a time, under the vast, compassionate sky of the American West.